Hey everyone, welcome to the second part of this video tutorial where I'm going to color this sketch with watercolor. If you haven't watched the first video, you might want to watch that first. The link is in the video description below, as well as the link to download the reference photo. So I started by erasing some of the pencil lines that were too obvious because I don't want them to get unwanted attention. Now this paper that I'm using is actually from the Strathmore Visual Journal with watercolor paper, and the Strathmore Visual Journal is actually quite good as a watercolor pad because the paper is able to handle wet on wet techniques surprisingly well, even though this paper is not made of 100% cotton. So for the sky, I wet the sky with my squirrel brush first. I make sure that I cover all the areas of the sky. I painted a single wash of cerulean blue, and then to make the top darker, I painted it with ultramarine. Now if you take a look at your skies, if you take a look outside of your window right now, if it's not a cloudy day, you may probably notice that the blue is usually more intense right at the top, and then it becomes less intense, and then towards the horizon it becomes whiter. So that's the effect that I'm trying to create by creating this blending wash from ultramarine to cerulean blue and then to the white of the paper. Now for the greens, I am mixing them with this yellow from the Sinelli Aqua Mini set. I'm still trying to use up all the paint in this set. This is the quality of these paints are quite high, so it takes me a long time to use them because I just need to use a tiny bit of paint to get really strong intensity. That's why it takes a long time to use up that box. So for the greens, it's yellow with cerulean blue and yellow with ultramarine. And now I'm painting the side of the building with this light wash of burnt umber. I just want to recreate the patterns on the block, but I don't want the colors to be too intense, so it's just a light wash. And when the wash dries later on, like what you are looking at right now, the wash is not too intense. It's not going to grab unwanted attention. So here I'm painting the shadow areas. Now when painting the shadow areas, two things to take note. Make sure you get the angles of the shadows right. So if you take a look at the top right, the shadow is actually coming down at sort of a 45-degree angle. So you need to get the angle right. And the second thing about painting shadows is you have to get the tonal value right. By tonal value, I'm talking about how dark the shadow is. Shadows are usually very dark, especially on a bright sunny day. There will be strong contrast, so that's where you would want to paint the shadows a bit darker. So for this building right in the background, I'm also painting the shadows, but notice the shadows, notice the shadow wash. It's actually a mix of ultramarine and burnt umber. It's not a flat wash. If you just paint a flat wash, it's going to be a bit boring. If you have some variation in your wash, it can be a transition of color from ultramarine to gray to burnt umber, or it can be a transition in terms of tonal value from a lighter color to a darker color. Those variations would make your wash look more interesting. So if you take a look at the far right side, the shadows on the far right side, it looks pretty flat and it's not as interesting compared to the shadows that are somewhere in the middle of the sketch. So for the windows, I'm actually painting them with a concentrated mix of ultramarine and burnt umber. Usually I would use ultramarine with burnt sienna, but in this particular set, I don't have any burnt sienna, so I just use whatever I have. If you take a look at the rooftop garden, right at the center there, just behind the rooftop garden, there is this darker blob of tree that I painted with a concentrated wash of ultramarine and burnt sienna over the initial wash of green. So whenever I want to paint the shadows for trees, I will use concentrated ultramarine with burnt sienna. And notice now I am painting the windows for that block in shadow. Sometimes you may want to paint the windows first and then add the shadows. Sometimes you can paint the details after adding the shadows. It really depends. Sometimes the order at which you lay down the washes can be quite important. So for example, if I were to paint the details first before painting the shadows, if the details are not dry yet, then while painting the shadows, it's going to blend all those details together. It's not going to look nice. But of course, you can wait until all the details are dry before you paint in the additional shadow layers. One reason why you may want to paint details first and then layer it with shadow is so that you can make those details appear more convincing in shadow. For example, if you take a look at the rooftop garden, I painted the colors first and then I overlay with the shadow. For the buildings behind, I painted the shadows first and then I added the windows later on. Now, if you are using a particular color and then you overlay it with shadow, that color is going to look more convincing compared to you laying the shadow first and then trying to recreate the shadow version of that color on top of the shadow. So sometimes when you're painting, the order does matter a lot. It's actually quite common for me to get the order wrong when I am painting. So sometimes when I'm painting, I would think to myself, oh, I should have painted this first and not now. So yeah, so painting sometimes do require some advanced planning. So this is pretty much the completed sketch. I'm just adding some details with the fountain pen and white gel pen. If you take a look at the rooftop garden and look at the railings there, you can see the white lines over the greens and black lines over the greens. So I like this play of white against dark, dark against light, light against gray. It makes the sketch look more interesting. As a finishing touch, I have added some people in the scene to make the scene look more lively and also to let people know how big that rooftop garden is by comparing it to the size of the people there. So that's all for today's tutorial. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below, and do consider supporting me on Patreon. Your support is what makes videos on my YouTube channel possible. Your support is the main reason why you do not see those obnoxious advertisements on my videos. So thanks for your support in advance, and a huge thanks to all my current patrons. Alright, see you in the next video. Bye!